Welcome to All About Art. My name is Alexandra, and I'm an art historian, curator, and writer. Within this podcast, topics relating to art history, cultural policy, the art sector, as well as a large range of other art-related topics will be covered. Conducting critical discussions, having entertaining exchanges, or just enjoying some relaxing chats, All About Art is where you'll find it all. Join me in exploring and developing cultural discourse. Welcome to another episode of All About Art. In this episode, I sat down with Dr. Val Ravaglia, Curator of Displays and International Art at Tate Modern. I speak to Val about their career path, having worked at the Tate Modern for over a decade, first as an intern and then as an assistant curator, and since 2019, Curator of Displays and International Art. We delve into the most recent exhibition they curated, titled Electric Dreams, Art and Technology Before the Internet, which celebrates the early innovators of optical, kinetic, programmed, and digital art. An absolutely amazing exhibition that is on until June 1st, 2025. We speak about the process of planning and developing such an extensive exhibition, and they give tips to anyone wanting to follow in their footsteps and curate at the Tate, and so much more. Thank you, Val, for coming on the podcast. Before we dive into the episode, I want to take a minute of your time to mention that All About Art is on Patreon. We are mostly volunteer-led, but in order to cover running costs and other expenses, we make it possible for our lovely listeners to support us, ranging from £1 a month to the price of an oat latte a month, or on the higher end, the price of a Sunday brunch per month, depending on the tier you want to choose. If every person who listens to the podcast signed up for the £1 tier on our Patreon, we would be able to sustain the podcast while also having scope to produce episodes more frequently and expand our activities in demystifying the professional arts sector. So, if you want to receive early access to episodes and behind-the-scenes content, maybe you want to get some merch, or if you just love what we do and want to support us, I would be thrilled if you considered signing up. The link to the Patreon is in the show notes. Also, thank you to our sponsors at Synergy Associates, the art world tech gurus, for supporting this episode's production at their clubhouse on Pall Mall. You can find more about Synergy and their facilities in the show notes. And now, on to the interview. Welcome to the podcast, Val.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
To start us off, I would love for you to tell listeners about your background. Can you tell me more about how you developed your career? What did you study? And how did you get into the arts?
Right. So I was born in Rome, Italy, and I studied art history in Rome at La Sapienza University, which is, one of those grand ancient Italian universities with quite the reputation. The modern and contemporary art history strand also had curatorial curriculum strand, which was quite rare for any undergraduate course, especially at that time. Now you find them a little bit more. But at that time, I think they were essentially experimenting with something, that was growing as an academic subject abroad. Even at the course, they used to talk about courses like the Goldsmiths curating course a lot.
Right. So they were looking maybe at international, like other courses abroad and implementing that maybe for their curriculum.
Yes, they definitely were. Like it was quite a novelty type approach to doing a fairly traditional art history course, but with a curating flair to it. Yeah, I think I've always had kind of a passion for 20th century art, but I can't put my finger really on when it started. It's almost more like I got that taste or interest by osmosis. My mom's always been into art at a kind of, just general interest level. And I've got these vivid memories of growing up with beautiful Chilean posters from the Allende years that they bought probably at a flea market somewhere, and they were on the walls in the corridor of my parents' place. And somehow that is one of my atavic memories that I associate with formative, like taste formation in my early years. But then, I just kind of naturally started going to see museums and exhibitions. I've always been quite a nerd growing up, so it felt like natural and a happy place for me to go, usually by myself, to, say, for example, Galleria Nazionale d'Arte Moderna in Rome, which is...
I love the way you said that. I'm sorry. I was just like, I felt like I was in Italy there for a sec.
Yeah, expect a few more of those. Which is a beautiful museum with an incredible collection. So yes, again, that was one of the things that I remember accumulating memories of and thinking, there's something here that is speaking to my soul that I need to figure out. And even my high school had an art history course. And obviously the last year goes into the historical avant-gardes a little bit. But I think my teacher wasn't too keen because the kids were too enthusiastic about surrealism for her taste. Like she was more of an old masters type person. She was like, oh. Looking down at those who they were already trying to choose one of the, edgy historical avant-gardes to discuss at the final exams. And she was like, oh, you're all the same, you teenagers and your avant-gardes. And almost as like a contrarianist, that made me even more fired to learn more about it. Yes, I also have memories of when Macro Museum, which is the Museum of Contemporary Art of Rome, so kind of a municipal museum, opened in the late 1990s in a former beer factory in Rome.
Oh, cool.
Yes. And I remember that being kind of a turning point, like when I became conscious of the fact that there is such a thing as a local art scene that needs to be cultivated and that, you need to be paying attention to what happens in the local galleries, commercial or public as they may be. But I was still quite young. And so there was a moment of becoming aware of the professional nuances of working in the arts a little bit at a time. And all of the relative fanfare around the opening of this new museum was one of those moments. There was a Tony Ersler exhibition that Macro in, I think, 2002 or so, that I actually remember visiting and thinking, I want to do this. I want to be the person that is responsible for laying out a narrative and telling people about the work of an artist by putting it on display in an exhibition format. So after studying art history at La Sapienza, I decided to move abroad to do my postgraduate studies. And I applied actually for the Goldsmiths course, which was much discussed and talked about when I was doing my undergraduate course, particularly in correspondence with conversations around the YBAs and the fact that a lot of them had studied at Goldsmiths. So it was painted like this place to be where a lot was happening. That was I had in my mind when I applied. I also applied for NYU and got in with the big difference that, I couldn't afford to pay the tuition fees for a US university.
That's so funny because I did my master's at Goldsmiths and I was going to apply to NYU but didn't because of the tuition fees for my master's, because Goldsmiths had arts administration and cultural policy, which I studied. And then NYU had art and politics, which is what I wanted to go do. And I didn't even apply because I was like, I can't pay that amount of money. Yeah, I totally get you.
I would have studied visual culture, actually, if I had gone to NYU. So in a sense, it was also going to be a kind of fork in the road moment, probably. Who knows, one of the what ifs of my life.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, I got a scholarship, so I wasn't going to pay any fees at Goldsmiths. So that choice was easy enough. So of course, I'm going to go to the free one. The course was quite different from what I expected, though, once I got to Goldsmiths. It's partly because I had not caught that institutional curating was almost a bad word for the curatorial scholars that taught at that university.
Really?
Yes, it was sort of positioned as a worst-case scenario. Like, if you absolutely must work in an institution to earn your daily bread, then be our guest, but that's not where it's at.
That is so funny because anyone who's outside of it and wants to be a curator, now, at least from what I feel, is like being a curator at the Tate is like the golden egg. Is that even I don't even know if that's like a saying, the golden egg, but it's like
the curator's egg.
The golden standard of like, wow, this is the job.
Yeah, well, that's definitely not how it felt at Goldsmiths in those years. Things might have changed because I'm talking about 2007 till 2009. So it's been a minute. But at that time, it was all about building your ambition to be a freelance curator and being entrepreneurial enough to be able to develop a project from scratch without even, a venue in mind, and seeking out possibilities, applying for grants, although very few practical skills were taught at the course. It was almost entirely theoretical. And I do remember, great courses, great teachers, incredible conversations, but coming out of the course thinking I actually can't really do much because the conversations around, even putting together a proper budget in order to allow you to do those grants with the Arts Council or whatever public body, were kind of hand-waved. Like, yeah, there is that thing that you should know, but let's actually talk about Foucault for a week.
Yeah, let's talk about Derrida and the frame within a frame within a frame of putting something on a wall, but let's not teach you how to write a grant proposal.
Exactly. So that was an issue. And also, I actually had already started working in institutions, because the first thing I did when I landed in London was go to Tate Modern to start my internship. Because the moment I knew that I was going to move to London, I immediately started applying. I say started applying, I only applied for the internship at Tate Modern and I got it at my first try. I was lucky like that, I guess.
No, we're not going to do that. You were not lucky. You probably wrote an amazing application and blew people away.
Well, that's an option. The other option is that they were actually happy to hire someone with spoken Italian because they knew that one of their exhibition was going to the Galleria Nazionale d'Arte Moderna.
There we go. We have it again.
Yes, there you go. So yeah, because my internship was with Nicholas Cullinan, who's now, by the way, the director of the British Museum.
Yeah.
Who at the time was an assistant curator at Tate Modern.
So Nicholas Cullinan was an assistant curator at Tate Modern, and then he had probably a further career at Tate. And then he was the director of the National Portrait Gallery, and now he's the director of the British Museum. Just a little fun fact for anyone listening in who wants to know more about Nicholas Cullinan.
Yes, young and visionary museum director at a young age.
Yeah.
And he was my, he was the assistant curator that I assisted as an intern for the Duchamp Picabia exhibition and the Site Wembley retrospective.
Cool.
Both of them, like, oh my God, I can't believe I am so lucky to have got the internship at Tate Modern at my first try and to work on two incredible exhibitions. And then I got to translate the Site Wembley catalog into Italian for when it went to the Galleria Nazionale.
You did?
Yeah, so I really played that card. While I was still studying, I started working at Dulwich Picture Gallery as an assistant curator. I was there for 4 years. Strange return to old masters, and because they have Guido Reni's and Domenichinos. And I had left Italy and the traditional art history academic world thinking, I can finally concentrate on just cool modern and contemporary stuff that happens in London. And here I am talking about Guido Reni, Saint Sebastian. And then I stopped working at Dulwich Picture Gallery to start my PhD, but immediately realized that I wasn't going to be able to support myself because I was paying for my PhD. I didn't get a scholarship for it the way that I did for my MA. And so I tried to knock back at the door of Tate and eventually got a maternity cover for an assistant curator called Anne Coxon. This was in 2012, and I've pretty much stayed there ever since.
Yeah. And in 2019, you assumed the position of curator of displays and international art at Tate Modern. And you've been at the Tate for, which you just mentioned, for nearly 13 years. And I think 9 of which you were the assistant curator. So my question is twofold. What does your job entail now as curator? What are your responsibilities? And how has your role changed and progressed in the last, slightly over the last decade?
So I'm currently the only curator that has the word displays in my job title. And I work with senior curator of displays, Mike Wallen, in a team, the core displays team, we call it, that includes a number of assistant curators that all also work on other projects. So it's in a sense that the displays core team has to be flexible enough to allow people to also join other projects as and when it's needed. But it requires a lot of attention because it is the backbone of the institution to work on collection displays. And yes, working for 9 years as the assistant curator for displays at Tate Modern, most of which with Matthew Gale, who was the former head of displays at Tate Modern, was just such an incredible experience. For example, I got to witness the first set of programs that were devised for the tanks when they opened for the first time.
For anyone who's not in London and doesn't know what the tanks are, could you briefly explain?
Yes, so architecturally, they are another subterranean level of Tate Modern that used to contain the oil, like the fossil fuel that powered the power station, essentially. Because Bankside Power Station, where Tate Modern is, used to be a oil-fueled power station just opposite St. Paul's, which is insanity to think about today. And they were always there when Tate Modern first opened in 2000, but a decision was made early on to let them marinate in the remainder of the oil for a little bit longer until there was motivation and budget to renovate that section of the building as well. And the opportunity came a few years later. They were reopened in 2012 with a program called Art in Action, which was all about multimedia, time-based media, performance, and cross-disciplinary practices that were best displayed and contextualized, not in a white cube, but in a kind of more flexible and more theatrical space. So the idea was to turn this, cavernous spaces into amphitheaters almost, right? But of a concrete industrial type. So yes, it was a beautiful moment with a lot of ferment because it felt like a turning point for the institution. We were doing something different with these spaces. So I was witnessing the most fascinating conversations between curators, thinking about the fundamentals of what it means to lay out a narrative in an institution that has always been doing something innovative with the museological principles behind the way that the collection is brought to the public. Because Tate Modern was one of the first museums, certainly the first of its size and scale, to hang the collection displays, not chronologically, but thematically. And so the tradition continued. It still continues to this day. But it also means that, every time the collection is rehung, it feels like we need to up the ante a little bit more. And the thematics also have to be broad enough that we can sustain them for a number of years by changing the rooms, so that, if we go overly specific, you shot yourself in the foot as a curator, because then it's going to be quite obvious that you're shoehorning things into the collection displays that don't belong in that thematic, right? So you still have to preempt and future-proof displays for the future.
Wow, that sounds really complicated.
Yes, it's incredibly complex. Regarding how the job has changed, I think I was appointed as a curator in 2019, which was, the year before the apocalypse happened. COVID hit when I was just starting to establish myself as curator of displays. Matthew Gale was one of the members of staff that decided to take voluntary redundancy after COVID. And so the entirety of the way that the displays team functions at Tate Modern was shifting rapidly. Somehow it still feels like we're shifting. It's, whether it was because Matthew left or later because Francis Morris left. And so with a new director, you get a new set of instructions or general direction of travel, principles and strategies for building the collection displays upon. Also, Catherine Wood, the director of exhibitions, has a hand, a decision-making role behind collection displays. And so we're still trying to get to grips with what we can do with the reduced budget, what the new directions of travels are, especially now that because of the reduction of budget, we can't do a complete collection rehang in the foreseeable future, I don't think. We're going to have to figure out ways of refreshing what we have and make gradual changes. In a sense, that's what we are used to doing as the displays team, because once you do a rehang, that there's a number of years where you have to be very responsive and flexible in order to change displays without rehanging the whole wing. So it's something that comes quite natural to me, because that's what I was trained to do for 13 years.
Right.
But now constraints seem to be the main starting point. It's concerning, and it's a time of great uncertainty. Again, in a sense, it's always been a time of great uncertainty.
Yes.
Like from the moment I joined, there was someone telling me, it's a transition phase.
Really?
We are 13
years later, and it's like, it's a transition phase. When is this transition phase going to end?
Just keep transitioning.
But I'm reading this book I can get it up. I think it's called 5 Days in the Art World, 7 Days in the Art World by Sarah Thornton. And in the introduction, I'm only a couple pages in, but in the introduction, I was already like, whoa. She writes, and she's like, this was off the back of the art market boom. We're all doing well. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow, what a feeling. Like, to actually be in the moment and to think, oh, we have it pretty good. Because I feel like ever since I've been in the sector, it's been we're kind of struggling here. Except for maybe in like 2017, 2018. I feel like that people were feeling like they were riding a sort of high, at least in the commercial art world. I don't know how it was in institutions. No. Okay.
Not
She shakes her head.
Well, I'll tell you what, when I was at Goldsmiths doing the curating course, the 2008 financial crisis happened. And so we went from being this young, plucky, wannabe curators motivated to develop the most experimental projects, but with the hope that if your proposal is strong enough, you can still go to the Arts Council and maybe get your grant and make it happen, to wild amounts of cuts throughout the cultural sector and hundreds of former curating students all going for the same shrinking pots of money. And fewer of us being able to actually put the entrepreneurial spirit into practice just because there was less money and fewer opportunities to go about. And so when I properly started working in the sector, so after my internship, when I, began to earn my bread by being a curator, there was always someone saying, oh, because of the cuts, we can't do this anymore. And that sentence has been a sort of refrain or leitmotif of my entire career.
Right. Fast forward all the way to present day. We are actually sitting here also, the way that you and I connected with one another is because you have curated a big exhibition at Tate Modern here in London called Electric Dreams, Art and Technology Before the Internet, which celebrates the early innovators of optical, kinetic, programmed, and digital art, with the artists who pioneered a new era of, for example, immersive sensory installations and automatically generated works. I would love to ask you how the exhibition came to be. And I mean, kind of more generally, how do themes of exhibitions get decided at such a big institution?
So Electric Dreams has quite the interesting history as a show because I didn't start it from scratch. I didn't propose it from a blank slate. And, it wasn't my initiative even to put it in the program.
And is that normally how that would function? Like you would submit a proposal from a blank sheet. You'd be like, this is my idea. This is my thing.
And it's one way of getting an exhibition in the program.
Yeah.
So, for example, the current Lee Bowery exhibition that has just opened at Tate Modern, that was proposed by one of my colleagues called Fintan Moran. And, it was his brainchild from the get-go. I also was quite surprised when it was immediately picked up because it's one of those exhibitions that just a few years ago would have been deemed to be not the right type of exhibition for Tate Modern. It's more of a V&A show. I'm doing air quotes. And and now it's open and it's brilliant.
Amazing. And with Electric Dreams, though, the process was different.
Yes, it was a pre-existing exhibition project that was put together as a touring exhibition by the International Partnerships team. Exhibition based on the strengths of open kinetic art from Tate's collection called The Dynamic Eye. And it was developed, initially curated by Clara Kim, who is now quite a senior curatorial figure at LACMA. But at that time, she was a senior curator at Tate Modern, and she was spearheading this project. When she left, it was passed on to me, partly because I actually had somewhat shaped its initial curatorial framing, because it was based on certain display models that I had worked on at Tate Modern called A View From. So A View From Zagreb, which was a display that I worked on dedicated to the new tendencies, and A View From Buenos Aires on the Centro de Arte y Comunicación, were actually models that Clara was basing her approach to the exhibition on. So it was decided quite early on that this exhibition was going to come back to Tate Modern. And it was put to me to bring it over in an expanded form, adding loans, a number of which ideally would be immersive installations, because the works that are already in the collection are, more like contained objects rather than that kind of spectacular photogenic installation that was part of the brief. It was literally given to me as bring it to the modern, but make it immersive, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, but I also kind of wanted to inflect it a little bit more with my personal research interests and bring it back to the research that I did for those collection displays that were informing its curatorial narrative in the first place. There's also the fact that it was designated already from the get-go as what we call the breakthrough exhibition, which is basically a new way of calling a blockbuster show.
Okay.
So the kind of exhibition...
Breakthrough exhibition. Sorry, I just wanted... That's something I've never heard before. But yeah, okay. Referencing the blockbusters.
Well, yeah, to try and avoid that kind of lingo. Replacing it with something different. And so the breakthrough shows are designated as the shows that bring the most people and therefore the most revenue for the museum as well. And therefore there's a palpable pressure for them to be successful, right?
Yeah.
Cue to me being this nerdy art historians who like vitrines with really dense documentation, and the head of exhibitions, Catherine Wood, that I was having this conversation with about, can I please make it a little bit more about the nitty-gritty of the artist's interest in technology in the post-war period. And she was actually incredibly accommodating. I have to say that she trusted me enough to do this exhibition in the first place, and it wouldn't have happened without her trusting me. But she was also, you can tell, trying to say, yes, well, but try and rein it down a bit on the vitrines. Some vitrines, but not in every room. And I was like, okay, fine, I'll figure it out.
I don't remember there being too many vitrines.
No, I think I reached the good balance.
Yeah, I do too.
So yeah, very much wanted to keep the strategy of the existing show and rooting the narrative in networks of artists that actually knew each other, worked with one another and collaborated with one another as kind of, let's call them nuclei for the exhibition. And those have become the main group rooms in the exhibition. And in between those group rooms, there's monographic rooms that tend to be, more immersive.
I mean, when you consider the type of art that's being exhibited, I know that it says it in the title. It's art that was created before the internet, right? But when you see the type of art that's really on view, like even maybe for listeners who haven't seen it, there's one, and I'm not sure if it's always there, but there's the projection of the video of basically an artist who taught herself how to code before the internet, and she created this work of visual art that's projected right along the wall that's right before you enter into the show. And I just stood there when you and I were meeting the last time I was at Tate Modern, and I just stood there and I watched it, and I was like, someone did this without Google.
Yeah.
And I know that maybe coders, I don't know if any coders are listening to this episode, but at the same time, they're probably rolling their eyes if they hear me say like, oh my God. But I just find all of this, thinking about these innovative strategies to bring culture and technology together pre-internet era, so unbelievably cool. Like it just is. It's so impressive. And so in the exhibition, I think really did an amazing job, or does, because it's still on. It does an amazing job of highlighting that and all the different ways in which it was done, which I just think is mind-blowing, really.
Yeah, that was kind of my core intent, right? To show, yes, the link between early digital art, early computer-aided art, as they called it at the time, and the legacy of constructivism that then led to so-called open kinetic art via the new tendencies. There's a whole trajectory that the exhibition goes over, and that's a story rooted in art historical events that I wanted to tell. But primarily, I wanted that moment to also say something about the past of digital art and how we got to the point where we are at, but also putting an emphasis to the phase that came before the internet, and so before a certain social use of computing, a certain ease to exchange information about how to do things with computers too. As you mentioned, these artists teaching themselves how to do things using literally magazines and manuals and talking to one another, or going to, rewind to me having the conversation with Catherine Wood, and essentially explaining to her that, yes, I was going to use the existing exhibition as a kind of basis, but I wanted to do something completely different with half of the show. And by the time that I managed to convince her and senior management at Tate that it was a good idea and a way to connect the themes with current conversations around art and automation, artificial intelligence and the role of digital art and creative labor. By the time I had convinced them to let me do this, I only had a year and a couple of months left until I needed to install the exhibition, which is incredibly short of a time for a group exhibition with this kind of ambition.
What's the ideal time frame for something like that?
At least 3 years for a show like this, I would say.
Wow, so double the time. So you had half the time that would have been an ideal, comfortable amount of time to put something like this together. What's it like to organize and plan and develop such a huge show with so many artists, with their estates, while also doing the complicated things of, keeping to the timeline, the budget, writing the texts? What sort of things does a curator have to think about within this process?
Well, it's complicated at the best of times. When you have a compressed timeline, it's even worse. But it's a beautiful challenge to have. And, a learning experience that will last a lifetime for me, for sure. I had to be really strategic in thinking about who I was going to ask for loans from, because unlike when you have enough time to, test the waters and see what loans you can actually get and find replacements for the ones that you don't get, I didn't have that luxury with the timeline that was at my disposal. So I had to be fairly confident that the people and institutions I approached were going to, be willing to lend their work. And even with my strategy, it still felt a very touch and go with some of the works. Also, because of the restrictions with the budget, I had to be mindful of requesting loans from a limited amount of places in the world in order to reduce the transport to just certain locales. So if you want to borrow a work because you really like it, but it's the only work that will come from, say, for example, mainland China, then it becomes unsustainable for the exhibition as a whole, right? So in many ways, I had to juggle several balls and make sure that I requested works from places that are kind of a critical mass of works that are still high quality enough to make the points that I want to make for an exhibition that is so compressed. I don't have the luxury of filler in this show, in a sense, because it's such concentrated a survey. And in general, and this is something that is institution-wide, we try to be more mindful about building less for budgetary reasons, but also because of the sustainability policies that Tate has embraced. So now all curators have a mandate to try and fit their curatorial ideas into the existing temporary architecture. Each exhibition flows from one into the other, and ideally you make the most of what you already have at your disposal.
So when you say temporary architecture and building less, do you mean in terms of actually actively building walls to put different artworks on, for example?
Walls and even display furniture. That's actually very expensive to produce when you need to make it to spec. When you go see an exhibition, if you pay attention to the kind of furniture that museums use, sometimes you see that they are using bulky wooden structures that were made to spec just for that exhibition. What happens to all of the plywood and plaster after the exhibition closes?
What, to sit on? That sort of thing?
Mounting structures or mounts for screens. Places like the V&A, for example, or the Science Museum are the kind of museums that generate a lot of very specific furniture, whereas Modern and Contemporary Art Museum, because of their architectural language use kind of a more neutral type furniture that lends itself more to being reused. So from that point of view, we're already at a sort of advantage.
Right. So I guess it's sort of like, in the simplest sense, for example, like a plinth for a sculpture.
Yes, we have a lot of plinths stacked in a corner of our handling studios.
Yeah.
Detached from their Perspex plinths, though. So there's always someone in our handling that has to go and find the Perspex top that goes with that plinth. Because I mostly work on collection displays. With collection displays, we're especially parsimonious, let's say. And so reusing plinths is kind of our bread and butter. And so a lot of time is dedicated to finding the plinth to recycle that was used like 5 years ago for a display that will fit this particular Giacometti sculpture that you want to put on display again. It's actually quite fun. I find it fun.
I feel like now when I go through Tate Modern, I'm going to be looking at the plinths more than the artworks to be like, I bet you took a really long time to find.
Well, don't look too close at them.
Okay.
Right.
Don't we won't look too close. I'm speaking on behalf of the audience listening in as well.
Right.
We'll just all go through and we'll appreciate but not look in detail. I mean, we touched on it a little bit earlier on when we were talking about the immersiveness or immersion that's present within the exhibition. And you did briefly mention that it was within the brief that you received for the show, or that you were, how would I put it? It was, did you receive a brief, or was it, obviously you took over the proposal, but then was audience engagement and immersion sort of a big priority for you and the museum? Or did you feel like that was quite led by the artworks themselves? Or how did that sort of come about? Or was the museum really like, this is a brief and it's important?
Well, it was an official brief, let's just say.
Right.
And a lot of it based on the fact that this is an exhibition, or the original the dynamic eye showed that the Electric Dreams project turned into was always based in types of practices that are essentially famously precursors of walkthrough and immersive installations, right? It's one of the art historical moments that is discussed and put forward as a case of, and this is where the current trend for immersive installations come from. So it wasn't forced into the narrative or aesthetic of the exhibition.
Right. It wasn't like, oh, we want people to come and take Instagram pictures, so find an immersive exhibition to put in this show, And it also, that would be quite silly because people would notice the inauthenticity of that straight away. Whereas this feels there's a lead up to it with different sorts of artworks. Like there was one room that was incredibly, there was a lot of optical illusion when you're in it. And it was like, whoa, that's such a stupid way to put it. But when you're walking through and then you come into the larger room with the lights changing and there's a lot of movement, a lot of dynamism. But anyway, continue, please.
But so, as I mentioned, because the works that were the core of the previous exhibition and were already in the collection tended to be kind of freestanding objects, not of the immersive kind. So the brief was, but make it immersive by adding those aspects that are crucial to those practices that are not in the collection, and also just so happen to be quite photogenic and would help, organic marketing for the exhibition by, setting up nice backgrounds for people to take selfies in front of. And there is quite a lot of that in Electric Dreams, but it is contextually relevant. The Moreye blue and red wallpaper. That's what
I was thinking of when I was like, the artwork that I previously referred to as whoa is that.
It's an official subtitle. No, but it's an important work of, in the history of the new tendencies and the group de recherche that visuel and randomness and algorithmic thinking. There is an actual reason for that wallpaper to be there, and it just so happens that it's also a very in-your-face, contrasting artwork. And if you read what Moreye was talking about with the aesthetics of it, he really wanted literally to almost hurt your eyes, which it kind of does.
It does kind of, yes, exactly.
Disorientating.
Well, I think it's interesting speaking to a curator like yourself. And of course, there's this balancing act, right? There's a balancing act between, okay, this is the proposal, this is the research, this is, and then also thinking these are the artworks, these are the artists, these are the art historical movements. But then you also think about, for example, the museum. You think about potentially communicating within the framework of the museum, which has its own sort of identity. And then you have to think about the audience. You have to think about all of these things and then add on budgetary restrictions and trying to, as you said, with this breakthrough show. And it's something that I think the art world sort of puts their nose up at sometimes because, yes, sometimes it is a little bit too superficial when we think about immersive installations and things like that. However, if it's something that has incredible intellectual integrity and fits really well into the exhibition and also achieves the ability to be attractive for that sort of organic marketing, for maybe younger audiences to be attracted to come and see the show, I think personally that that's incredibly positive because all it does is has good sides to it, right? Because it still maintains that suitability for the show while also potentially bringing in more revenue, maybe.
Well, so I do think that a good exhibition should also be an enjoyable experience just in general, especially in a venue that makes it one of its core values to communicate to as broad a public as possible. Not just specialists, including crowds, but, anyone and as many more people as it's possible for an institution to introduce to the beauty and importance of the arts. And I would lie if I said that I didn't also enjoy designing the exhibition to be fun and seductive. There is a certain giddiness to walking through your exhibition for the first time and you yourself going, "Woo, this is fun." I wanted to make sure it was as fun and seductive as it was informative, though. And so I wanted it to surprise everyone, different audiences in different ways, really. Specialists would ideally also come out having learned something, which is something I gave a lot of thought. And, maybe they get a new perspective on something familiar, or the juxtaposition of well-known names with not so well-known, bringing out connections that maybe they weren't as aware of before. To hear my colleagues say that they learned something is something that gives me a special type of satisfaction.
Yeah. Thinking about anyone who's interested in doing your job, in following in your footsteps and becoming a curator at Tate, what are a few tips that you would give them as someone who spent, honestly, like a really large part of their career at the museum?
I would recommend that they really think about what it means to do this kind of work in an institution that's as large as Tate.
Yeah.
For some, the opportunity to connect to such a huge audience comes with a price, because the larger the organization, the less the autonomy, and the more the bureaucracy and the compromises. So an institutional curator has to be, I'd say, particularly patient and resilient. They're kind of two core characteristics that really help you survive in a place like a national institution.
Couldn't be me. I'm so impatient. I'm literally one of the most impatient people you will ever meet.
Yeah, it's trying sometimes, but it doesn't come with its own satisfactions. It is Tate Modern in particular, one of the most visited modern and contemporary museums in the world. So on the other side, you get to do things that actually do connect to people. But you have to make sure that, the process that gets you there doesn't kill your passion, because I have seen some of my colleagues come to Tate with certain expectation of being able to do what they wanted to do, to really flex their curatorial muscle, and being essentially forced to sit on the back burner waiting for an opportunity to present themselves while working on other things that were already being programmed, or picking up the slack of other people that have left the institution. This is part and parcel of what you have to do as an institutional curator. And if you want to take that route, you have to be prepared to also do things you're not that enthusiastic about.
Yeah. I think that kind of ties into when, I don't know if it's kind of risky to say this, but like I think maybe nowadays a lot of people have this idea of the star curator. And I think this emerged with like Hans-Ulrich Obrist being, so famous. And then there's a lot of other really well-known curators. And throughout, I guess, the late 90s, early 2000s, that this sort of idea of the curator has developed. But when you're a part of such a big organization, it cannot be about you and your ideas. It has to be about the greater picture, and you have to be willing to be a team player to, as you just said, do things that or research things, work on things that you're not super enthusiastic about all the time. But I guess if you are the type of person who feels very happy to do that and in a sense still feels a reward from that, or feels what's the word that I'm looking for? When you feel fulfilled doing that. That is when you know that that's the right place for you. I think for me, I wouldn't feel fulfilled. I always thought that my dream was to work in an institution. And looking at it now, I don't think that would be for me. Not because I don't think it's an amazing job, but because my personality just doesn't fit with it. I don't think I would be happy. But I think that's why it's so important to talk about these things, because there's this conception, I think, amongst art history students, for example, that you either are a gallerist or a curator. And talking about what it actually means to be a curator, a lot of people don't fully understand what that job entails and what sort of responsibilities you have and what sort of conversations you need to be having both with others as well as with yourself to see if this is the right thing for you, let alone the differences between being a freelance curator, a curator at a commercial institution, a curator at a public institution, at a small one, at a big one, because that also completely changes. And so I think it's really important to talk about it and to be real about it, Like, yes, there are really amazing sides to it, but no, it's not the job that everyone just kind of sits and thinks, oh yeah, the ideal job because I just get to hang paintings all day and write about them all day and engage with it. And that's what my job is. It's like, no, you have to think about, can I ship this work from mainland China, or how much will this cost?
But then there's another side also to preferring to work not in institutions but more in a freelance role, which is that autonomy comes at the cost that you have to do everything yourself, or maybe with a couple of people that help you. But it's only you doing the grant applications, whereas I don't get to do any of that at Tate because there's an entire department that seeks money and funds for making the projects happen. So in a sense, I have the privilege that I don't have to worry with that side of the art world. And by the way, it's important to have that experience, because if I leave Tate and need to fill a grant application, I'm basically like an undergraduate student that doesn't really know how to do it anymore. The last one I did was literally in 2008. So
okay,
yeah.
Well, Val, that actually concludes my questions. And I mean, in the interest of time, I do see that we've been chatting for a while. And so I want to ask you my final question that I ask all of my guests here on the podcast, just to round things off. If you could pick one artist from art history to have dinner with, who would it be and why?
Working on Electric Dreams, I became fascinated with Atsuko Tanaka, who is the artist that created the electric dress, which is reproduced in a photograph in the opening room of Electric Dreams. This is 1956. And the story goes that she was sitting in the train station in Osaka and was inspired by looking at the cityscape having changed so drastically since the end of the Second World War. And now, all of these neon signs and sparkling lights being visible from the train station in a way that they didn't used to be. As a painter or, an artist working with visual stimuli, she thought about making a work that would become or that would turn this cityscape and sparkling lights into a moving painting that she could wear. And so made a dress made of electric lights called the Electric Dress. Now, what I would want to do is to have a time machine and go to Osaka in the 1950s and really have a conversation with this person who had this idea that was just absolutely unlike anything that anyone was doing at that time. Even her own peers, the rest of the Gutai artists, were more or less working with traditional media, primarily painting. Yes, they were applying the paint with their feet or chucking it on the canvas, but between that and using wires and electric bulbs, there's quite a step. And so, yes, I would just want to have a glimpse into her mind at that time, but potentially also meeting her partner, Akira Kanayama, who was also a kind of an exceptional good eye artist, making paintings with a radio-controlled car.
Yeah, actually, I saw that because one of my favorite artists is So-Gwen Chung, who works with artificial intelligence. And I think he was one of her biggest inspirations as well.
Yeah, not surprised, yeah.
Yeah.
Plus the fact that there's probably very authentic Japanese food at the table would be another plus.
Okay, so we're not bringing them into present day. We're sending you back to the 1950s Japan.
Yes, please. Please and thank you.
I'll do my best. Well, Val, thank you so much for coming on All About Art and sharing your expertise, telling us more about your experience as a curator at Tate Modern. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having me. It's lots of fun.
And that is it for today on All About Art. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a rating or a review, as it helps more people discover the show. Also, feel free to share with your friends, or if you share on social media, tag me and get in touch. Thank you so much for listening.